Zola's voice trembled as she spoke, her hands shaking slightly as she approached the boy. "There's something important I need to tell you. Please don't be angry with me. I've kept this secret for a long time, and I'm sorry." Adam looked up from his homework, confusion clear on his face. He stood up and walked towards Zola, concern in his eyes. "Zola, what's wrong? What secret are you talking about?" Zola took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. "Adam, this isn't easy to say. I'm your real mother. You're my son." Tears began to roll down Zola's cheeks as she watched Adam's face change from confusion to disbelief. The room fell silent. The only sound was Zola's quiet sobs. Adam stumbled backward, shaking his head. "No, that's not possible. You can't be my mother. You're my nanny." "I know it's hard to believe, Adam," Zola said softly, reaching out toward him. "But it's the truth. When you were born, I had no choice. I left you at the billionaire's gate so you could have a better life. I couldn't provide for you then." Adam's mind was reeling. He couldn't process what he was hearing. "If you're really my mother, why did you keep it a secret all this time? Why didn't you tell me?" Zola wiped her tears, trying to compose herself. "I had to keep it a secret to protect you, to make sure you had a good life. But things are different now. We could leave together, start a new life." Adam stood there, silent and stunned. His nanny, the woman who had cared for him for years, was claiming to be his mother. It seemed impossible. "Adam," Zola continued, her voice urgent, "you won that prize money, 20 million NA. We could use that to build a new life together, just the two of us." But Adam wasn't ready to accept this revelation. "No, I'm not going anywhere. How do I know you're telling the truth? How can I believe you're really my mother?" Zola pleaded with him, her voice filled with desperation. "Adam, please. We don't have much time. We need to leave before it's too late. We can go to your school, claim the prize money, and start over." As Zola continued to explain, sharing details from the past, Adam began to see the truth in her words, the love she had always shown him, the special bond they shared. It all started to make sense. But even as he began to accept that Zola might truly be his mother, a new worry formed in his mind. "But how can we leave?" Adam asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "How can we escape from here?" They both knew escaping wouldn't be easy. "How will we get past the gate?" "The guards are always there," Adam whispered. "I know, Adam. It's going to be tricky. We need to be patient and careful," Zola replied. They often found themselves staring at the high walls and watchful guards, feeling trapped. The gateman was particularly vigilant, never leaving his post unattended. "Maybe we could sneak out at night," Adam suggested hopefully. "It's too risky," Zola replied. "The security cameras are always on, and the night guards do regular patrols." Their desire for freedom grew, but so did their frustration at the seemingly impossible task ahead. The next day, Zola sat alone in her small room, her mind racing with ideas. She tried to think of ways to escape with Adam, but each plan seemed more impossible than the last. "We could sneak out at night," she muttered to herself. "No, the guards would catch us." She paced back and forth, growing more frustrated. "Maybe we could disguise ourselves, but how would we get past the gate?" After hours of failed planning, Zola slumped onto her bed, feeling defeated. Suddenly, a new thought struck her. "What if I just told them the truth?" she whispered. The idea was both terrifying and exciting. She imagined herself standing before the billionaire, revealing her true identity as Adam's mother. "It's risky," she said to herself, "but it might be our only chance." Zola took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. "I have to do this, for Adam, for both of us." She knew this choice would change everything, but she was ready to fight for her son. By evening, the billionaire's family had gathered for dinner. The dining room was filled with the clinking of expensive cutlery and quiet conversation. Zola stood nervously by the door, her heart pounding. She took a deep breath and stepped forward. "I'm sorry, sir, but I have something important to say," Zola spoke, her voice trembling slightly. Mr. Mark looked up from his plate, confusion etched on his face. "What is it, Zola? Can't it wait until after dinner?" Zola shook her head. "No, sir, it can't wait any longer." She paused, gathering her courage. The truth is, Adam is my son. I'm his real mother. The room fell silent. Sarah's fork clattered onto her plate. What? What nonsense are you talking about? Adam is our son, she screamed, her face turning red. Mr. Mark stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Zola, what's wrong with you? We hired you as a nanny, not to claim our child as your own. Zola's eyes filled with tears. I'm so sorry, sir, but it's true. I had to leave him at your gate years ago because I was too poor to raise him. When I saw you needed a nanny, I took the chance to be close to him. I never meant to deceive you. Sarah's voice was cold with fury. This is ridiculous. You're fired. Zola, pack your things and get out of our house immediately. Zola stood her ground, her voice growing stronger. I can't leave without Adam. He's my biological son. I won't abandon him again. Mr. Mark's face contorted with anger. This is outrageous. You have no right to come into our home and make these claims. Leave now, or I'll call the police. Please. I want to go with her. Adam cried out, tears streaming down his face. He tried to run to Zola, but Sarah grabbed his arm. You can't go with her, Adam, Sarah said firmly. We're your parents. Now go to your room and don't say another word. Zola's heart broke seeing Adam's distress. I won't leave without my son, she repeated, her voice cracking with emotion. Mr. Mark had heard enough. He turned to the doorway and shouted, Security! Get in here now! The gateman rushed in, looking confused. Mr. Mark pointed at Zola. Remove this woman from our property immediately. She is no longer welcome here. No, please. Zola begged as the gateman grabbed her arm. Adam! Adam, I love you. Adam tried to break free from Sarah's grip. Zola, don't take her away. But it was too late. The gateman dragged Zola through the house and out the front door. With a final shove, she found herself outside the gate, alone on the dark street. As the gate clanged shut behind her, Zola collapsed to her knees, sobbing. Inside, she could still hear Adam's muffled cries. The night air was cold, and she had nowhere to go. But even in her despair, she made a silent promise to her son. I'll find a way back to you, Adam. I won't give up. Zola wandered the dark streets for hours, her feet aching and her heart heavy. Finally, she stumbled upon an unfinished building and decided to take shelter there for the night. As she lay on the cold concrete floor, her mind raced with worry and regret. What have I done? She whispered to herself. How will I ever see Adam again? She tossed and turned, unable to find comfort. Maybe I should have waited longer, she muttered, but I couldn't keep lying to him. Meanwhile, back at the billionaire's mansion, Adam lay awake in his bed, tears silently rolling down his cheeks. Why did they send Zola away? He wondered aloud. She's my real mom. Will I ever see her again? He clutched his pillow tightly, feeling more alone than ever. I wish I could have gone with her, he sniffled. What if she doesn't come back for me? As the night wore on, both Zola and Adam remained awake, their thoughts filled with fear and longing for each other. The next morning, Mr. Mark and Sarah sat in their luxurious living room, their faces etched with worry. The events of the previous night weighed heavily on their minds. Sarah broke the tense silence. Honey, what if Zola was telling the truth? What if Adam really is her son? Mr. Mark frowned, rubbing his temples. I've been thinking about that too. Remember how we found Adam at our gate all those years ago? Sarah nodded slowly. Yes, it was such a strange night. We just took him in. I've been suspecting something was off with that nanny, Mr. Mark admitted. She was always so close to Adam, more than a normal nanny would be. Sarah's voice rose with anger. I can't believe we hired her. Now she shows up claiming Adam as her own, a boy she abandoned. We're the ones who gave him a good life. Mr. Mark stood up, pacing the room. After all these years of raising Adam, how can she think she has any right to him now? Exactly! Sarah exclaimed. She's poor, she has no resources. We're the ones who've provided for Adam. She can't just waltz in and take him away. Unknown to them, Adam stood just outside the room, listening to every word. His small hands clenched into fists as he realized the truth of Zola's words. Later that day, Mr. Mark noticed Adam's change in behavior. "Adam, come here. Why aren't you eating your dinner?" Adam glared at him, pushing his plate away. "I'm not hungry." Sarah tried to intervene. "Adam, honey, what's wrong? You love this food. Stop pretending you care," Adam shouted, surprising both adults. "You're not my real parents." Mr. Mark's face hardened. "Adam, that's no way to speak to us. Go to your room now." As Adam stormed off, Sarah turned to her husband, her voice trembling. "What are we going to do? He's never acted like this before." Mr. Mark sighed heavily. "We'll have to be patient. He's confused right now, but we're his parents no matter what Zola says. He'll come around." But as days passed, Adam's behavior only worsened. He refused to eat, barely spoke, and spent most of his time alone in his room. Sarah and Mr. Mark exchanged worried glances. They were losing the boy they had raised as their own, and they didn't know how to fix it. Zola sat on the curb, her head in her hands. "How can I fight against rich people like them?" she muttered to herself. "I'm just a poor woman, but I can't give up on my son." Tears streamed down her face as she sobbed openly on the street. A man walking by noticed her distress and approached cautiously. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said gently. "Is everything okay? Why are you crying out here in this heat?" Zola looked up, wiping her eyes. "It's nothing you can help with. The problem is too big." The man sat down beside her. "Sometimes talking about our problems can help. Why don't you tell me what's wrong? Maybe I can offer some advice or assistance." Zola hesitated, then sighed. "Well, it's a long story, but it's about my son. He's been taken from me by a wealthy family." The man listened intently as Zola began to share her story, offering her a sympathetic ear in her moment of despair. Zola took a deep breath and began sharing her story with the stranger. "It all started years ago when I was young and poor. I had a baby boy, but I couldn't take care of him, so I left him at a rich family's gate, hoping they'd give him a better life." The man nodded for her to continue. "Recently, I got a job as a nanny for that same family. I didn't know it was my son at first, but when I realized, I couldn't keep it a secret anymore. I told them the truth, and they kicked me out. Now they're keeping my son from me." Zola finished, her voice breaking. "Please, I just want my son back. He's not happy with them, I know it in my heart." The man's expression softened. "I understand your pain, but crying won't solve anything. You need to be strong for your son. I think I might be able to help you, but I need to be certain you're telling the truth. Are you really the boy's mother?" Zola nodded vigorously. "Yes, I swear it. I can prove it if I need to." The man introduced himself as Mr. Tony, a lawyer. "Your situation touches me, Zola. I want to help you." Zola's eyes lit up with hope. "Really? You'd do that for me?" Mr. Tony smiled kindly. "Yes, but first let's get you somewhere safe to stay. You can't keep sleeping on the streets." He helped Zola find a small, affordable apartment. "It's not much," he said, "but it's a start. You'll be safe here while we figure out what to do next." Zola looked around the tiny room, tears of gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Tony. I don't know how to repay you." "Don't worry about that now," he replied. "Let's focus on getting your son back." With the little money she had saved from her nanny job, Zola bought some basic groceries. As she put them away in the small kitchen, she turned to Mr. Tony. "What's our next step?" she asked, determination in her voice. Mr. Tony sat at the small table, his brow furrowed in thought. "First, we need to gather evidence. Do you have any documents that prove you're Adam's mother? A birth certificate, maybe?" Zola's face fell. "No, I don't have anything like that. I was so young and scared when I had him." "That makes things harder, but not impossible," Mr. Tony reassured her. "We might need to consider a DNA test. Are you willing to do that?" Zola nodded without hesitation. "Absolutely. Anything to get my son back." Mr. Tony stood up, a plan forming in his mind. "All right, Zola, Get some rest tonight. Tomorrow we'll start building our case. It won't be easy going against a wealthy family, but I promise you we'll do everything we can to reunite you with your son." As Mr. Tony left, Zola sat on her small bed, feeling a mix of hope and anxiety. She looked out the window, thinking of Adam. "Hold on, my son," she whispered. "I'm coming for you. I won't give up." 2 days later, Zola and Mr. Tony stood at the gates of the billionaire's mansion. Zola's heart raced as they were let in by the security guard. They found Mr. Mark and Sarah relaxing on the patio, enjoying the cool evening breeze. Mr. Mark's eyes widened in surprise when he saw Zola. "You again? I thought we made it clear you weren't welcome here." "And who's this man with you?" he asked. Mr. Tony stepped forward, his demeanor professional and calm. "Good evening, Mr. Mark. I'm Tony Johnson, an attorney representing Ms. Zola. We're here to discuss the matter of Adam." Sarah stood up abruptly, her face flushing with anger. "There's nothing to discuss. Adam is our son." Mr. Mark placed a hand on his wife's arm, trying to calm her. He turned to Mr. Tony with a forced smile. "So Zola's brought a lawyer to claim Adam. That's quite amusing, considering she has no proof he's her son." Mr. Tony remained unruffled. "That's precisely why we're here, Mr. Mark. We'd like to propose a DNA test to determine Adam's parentage once and for all." Mr. Mark's smile faltered. "A DNA test? That's absurd. We don't need to prove anything. Adam is our son, end of story." Zola, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "Please, Mr. Mark, if you're so sure, why not take the test? What are you afraid of?" Sarah glared at Zola. "We're not afraid of anything. We just don't need to prove ourselves to a woman we employed as a nanny over our child." Mr. Tony intervened, his voice firm but respectful. "Mr. and Mrs. Mark, I understand this is a sensitive issue, but surely you can see that a DNA test would put this matter to rest. If Adam is truly your biological son, you have nothing to lose." Mr. Mark paced the patio, clearly agitated. "This is ridiculous. We've raised Adam for years. We're the only parents he's ever known." "That may be true," Mr. Tony acknowledged, "but it doesn't change the fact that Zola claims to be his biological mother. A DNA test is the most straightforward way to resolve this." A tense silence fell over the group as Mr. Mark and Sarah exchanged worried glances. Zola pleaded, her voice breaking. "Please, I just want to know for sure. Don't you want to know the truth?" Mr. Mark ran his hand through his hair, frustration evident on his face. "And what if the test shows Adam isn't our biological son? What then? Do you expect us to just hand him over to you?" Mr. Tony shook his head. "No one's talking about taking Adam away right now. This is simply about establishing the truth. Any decisions about Adam's future would need to consider his best interests." Sarah burst out. "His best interests are with us. We're the ones who've given him everything." Zola couldn't hold back her tears. "I know you've taken good care of him, and I'm grateful for that, but he's my son. I have a right to be in his life." The argument continued, voices rising and falling as emotions ran high. Mr. Mark paced back and forth, clearly torn. Finally, after what seemed like hours of debate, Mr. Mark held up his hand. "Enough. Fine, we'll do the DNA test." Sarah gasped. "Mark, are you sure?" He nodded, his expression grim. "Yes. If it's the only way to put this matter to rest, then so be it. But understand this," he said, turning to Zola. "Regardless of what the test shows, we won't give up Adam without a fight." Mr. Tony nodded solemnly. "We understand. Thank you for agreeing to the test. We'll arrange for it to be done at a reputable clinic as soon as possible." As Zola and Mr. Tony prepared to leave, Zola caught a glimpse of Adam watching from an upstairs window. Their eyes met briefly before he disappeared from view. Zola's heart ached, but she felt a glimmer of hope. "Soon," she whispered to herself. "Soon I'll know the truth." The next day, a tense group gathered at the hospital for the DNA test. Zola, Mr. Tony, and Mr. Mark sat in the waiting room, avoiding eye contact with each other. After what felt like hours, the doctor emerged with a folder in hand. "I have the results," he announced. Everyone leaned forward, hearts racing. The doctor cleared his throat. According to the DNA analysis, Adam is Mr. Mark's biological son. A collective gasp filled the room. Mr. Mark stood stunned, while Zola shook her head violently. No, that's impossible. There must be a mistake. Adam is my son. Mr. Tony gently took the results from the doctor, his brow furrowed as he read. I'm sorry, Zola, but it's clear here the DNA matches Mr. Mark. Zola collapsed to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. This can't be right. How is this possible? Mr. Mark, still in shock, muttered, I didn't expect this. I truly thought. The doctor tried to comfort Zola. I understand this is difficult, but the test is highly accurate. Zola looked up, her eyes wild with desperation. Please, there must be some mistake. Can we do the test again? Mr. Tony placed a hand on her shoulder. Zola, I know this isn't what you wanted to hear, but we have to accept the results. As the reality sank in, Zola's cries echoed through the hospital corridor, leaving everyone wondering how this unexpected turn of events could have happened. Zola crumpled to the floor of the corridor, her body shaking with uncontrollable sobs. Passers-by cast sympathetic glances, but she was oblivious to everything except her overwhelming grief. How is this possible? She whispered between gasps. Adam is my son. I carried him. I gave birth to him. How can the DNA say otherwise? Mr. Tony knelt beside her, his face etched with concern. Zola, please try to calm down. We need to think this through. Zola looked up at him, her eyes red and swollen. Think what through? The test says Adam isn't mine. But I know he is. I just know it. Meanwhile, Mr. Mark stood a few feet away, his expression a mix of relief and confusion. He turned to Mr. Tony, his voice steady but with a hint of smugness. Well, Mr. Lawyer, I told you from the beginning that Adam was our son. I hope this puts an end to your client's ridiculous claims. Mr. Tony frowned, clearly troubled by the turn of events. Mr. Mark, I admit I didn't expect this outcome, but you must understand why we pursued this course of action. Mark waved his hand dismissively. I understand nothing except that you've wasted our time and caused unnecessary stress to my family. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going home to my son. As Mark walked away, Zola struggled to her feet, her legs weak and unsteady. Lawyer, please, she begged, grabbing Mr. Tony's arm. You can't give up now. There must be some mistake. Adam is my son. I don't understand how the DNA could say Mr. Mark is the father. Mr. Tony sighed heavily, his professional demeanor slipping to reveal his own confusion and disappointment. Zola, I want to believe you, but DNA doesn't lie. It's the most accurate way to determine parentage. But what if something went wrong with the test? Zola pressed, desperation clear in her voice. What if there was a mix-up at the lab? Or what if someone tampered with the results? Mr. Tony shook his head slowly. Those are serious accusations, Zola. We can't make claims like that without evidence. I'm sorry, but I don't see what else we can do at this point. Zola's face crumpled, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. So that's it. You're giving up on me, on Adam. The lawyer placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. I'm not giving up, Zola, but we need to be realistic. The law is clear on this matter. Without evidence to challenge the DNA results, we have no legal grounds to pursue custody. Zola pulled away from him, her voice rising with anger and despair. I don't care about legal grounds. I care about my son. I won't stop fighting for him, even if I have to do it alone. With that, she turned and stumbled down the hospital corridor, leaving Mr. Tony standing there, watching her go with a mixture of sympathy and helplessness. Mr. Mark pulled into the driveway of his mansion, his mind still reeling from the day's events. He hurried inside, finding Sarah lounging on the couch, watching TV. Darling, you won't believe what happened at the hospital today, he said, his voice filled with excitement and confusion. Sarah turned to him, a sly smile on her face. Oh, try me. I might not be as surprised as you think. Mark's eyebrows shot up. What do you mean? Do you know something about this? Sarah laughed, a hint of mischief in her eyes. Let's just say I had a feeling things would work out in our favor. Sarah, what are you talking about? Mark pressed. The DNA test. It said I'm Adam's father. But how is that possible? Sarah stood up, walking toward her husband. Oh, Mark, did you really think I'd let that woman take our son? Of course I made sure the test results went our way. Mark's jaw dropped. Wait, are you saying you tampered with the test? Sarah nodded, looking rather proud of herself. I contacted the doctor at Grace Hospital and made sure he'd give us the results we wanted. A little bribe goes a long way. Mark was speechless for a moment, then pulled Sarah into a tight hug. I can't believe you did that. You're incredible. Sarah hugged him back, her voice hardening. That Zola girl is delusional if she thinks she can come back after all these years and take Adam from us. Not on my watch. Mark pulled back, a mix of admiration and concern on his face. But Sarah, if this ever gets out. Sarah waved her hand dismissively. It won't. We're in the clear now. Adam is ours, legally and officially. End of story. Despite the setback with the DNA test, Zola refused to give up on Adam. Each day she'd wake up with renewed determination. I know I'm poor, she'd tell herself, but I'm his mother. I have to keep fighting. As she sat in her small rented room, an idea struck her. Adam's school, she exclaimed. I can find him there. Zola paced her room, planning her next move. I'll go to his school, she muttered. I can talk to him there, away from the billionaires. She hesitated, worry creeping in. But what if they've told the school not to let me near him? Shaking off her doubts, Zola straightened her shoulders. It doesn't matter. I have to try. Adam needs to know the truth. She glanced at the clock, calculating the best time to go. I'll wait until just before school ends. That's my best chance to see him. With a mix of hope and anxiety, Zola prepared herself for the confrontation ahead, determined to reconnect with her son no matter the obstacles. Zola woke up early, her heart filled with hope. She carefully chose her clothes, wanting to look presentable. As the school day neared its end, she hailed a bike to St. Mary's School. Please, she told the rider, her voice trembling with anticipation. Arriving at the school, Zola's eyes scanned the compound anxiously. Suddenly, she collided with someone. Oh, I'm sorry. Zola apologized, looking up to see a familiar face. The teacher's eyes widened in recognition. Wait, aren't you Adam's nanny? Zola stumbled over her words. Yes, I was. I'm here to pick him up. The teacher frowned, confused. Adam. But he doesn't go here anymore. Didn't you know? Zola's heart sank. What do you mean? When did this happen? His parents transferred him after he won that big award, the teacher explained. I thought you'd know, being his nanny and all. Zola's mind raced. No. There must be some mistake. Can I check his classroom? The teacher shook her head. I'm sorry, but that's not possible. Is everything okay? Zola forced a smile. No, everything's fine. I must have forgotten about the transfer. Thank you. As the teacher walked away, Zola leaned against a wall, devastation washing over her. She realized the billionaires had outsmarted her once again, moving Adam to keep him out of her reach. What am I going to do now? She whispered, tears welling in her eyes. The path to her son seemed to grow more difficult with each passing day. Adam sat at his desk, staring blankly at the open book before him while his classmates laughed and played outside. He remained lost in thought, his mind filled with worry about his real mother, Zola. His teacher, Mrs. Johnson, watched him with concern. Adam, she called softly. When he didn't respond, she approached his desk. Adam, she said louder, tapping his shoulder. Adam startled, looking up at his teacher with sad eyes. Oh, sorry, Mrs. Johnson. I didn't hear you. Mrs. Johnson pulled up a chair. Adam, what's wrong? You've been so quiet lately, this isn't like you at all. Adam hesitated, then sighed deeply. It's nothing, Mrs. Johnson. I'm fine. But Mrs. Johnson wasn't convinced. Come on, Adam. I can see something's bothering you. Maybe I can help if you tell me what's going on. After some gentle prodding, Adam finally opened up. It's my mother, he said quietly. My real mother. She's been forced to leave, and I'm not happy living with the billionaires anymore. Mrs. Johnson listened intently as Adam poured out his story. When he finished, she placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. Oh, Adam, that's such a difficult situation. Your mother needs legal help. Actually, my husband is a judge. He might be able to assist. Adam's eyes lit up slightly. Really? You'd do that for me? Mrs. Johnson nodded. Of course. But tell me, do you know where your mother is staying now? Adam shook his head sadly. No, but I remember the lawyer who was helping her. His name is Mr. Tony. He lives at number 20 in our estate. His son is in my class, Tommy. Mrs. Johnson's eyes widened in recognition. Mr. Tony. I know him. He's a friend of my husband. This is perfect, Adam. We might be able to locate your mother through him. For the first time in days, a small smile appeared on Adam's face. Thank you so much, Mrs. Johnson. She squeezed his hand reassuringly. Everything will be okay, Adam. We'll figure this out. Now why don't you go join your friends outside? It might help take your mind off things for a bit. Adam nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope as he headed to the playground. Mrs. Johnson watched him go, already planning how she could help reunite this young boy with his mother. After her conversation with Adam, Mrs. Johnson wasted no time discussing the matter with her husband, Judge Thompson. Honey, I have a sensitive case I need your help with, she began. It's about one of my students, Adam. Judge Thompson listened intently as his wife explained the situation. This is indeed a complex case, he said, but we can't ignore a child's welfare. I'll look into it immediately. After Mrs. Johnson's conversation with her husband, Judge Thompson took immediate action. The next morning, he called his court clerk. I need 2 summons prepared immediately, he instructed, one for Mr. and Mrs. Mark and another for a woman named Zola. The clerk nodded. Yes, Your Honor. I'll have them ready within the hour. By afternoon, 2 official-looking envelopes were on their way. A court courier drove to the billionaire's mansion, first ringing the doorbell with a sense of importance. The housekeeper answered. Yes, delivery for Mr. and Mrs. Mark, the courier said, handing over the envelope. At the same time, another courier navigated the bustling streets to find Zola's modest apartment. He knocked on her door repeatedly until she answered. Ms. Zola, he asked. When she nodded, he handed her the envelope. Court summons for you. Back at the mansion, Mr. Mark tore open the envelope, his face growing redder as he read. Sarah, he yelled. Come here now. Sarah rushed in. What is it, dear? Mr. Mark's voice shook as he read aloud. You are hereby summoned to appear in court to prove the biological parentage of the child known as Adam. This is outrageous. Sarah's face paled. How did this happen? We were so careful with everything. Mr. Mark crumpled the paper in his fist. I don't know, but we're not going down without a fight. Call our lawyer immediately. On the day of the hearing, the courtroom buzzed with tension. Judge Thompson entered, and everyone rose. Be seated, he said. We're here to determine the true parentage of Adam. Let's begin with the previous DNA test results. Mr. Mark's lawyer stood up. Your Honor, we have those results here. They clearly show my client is the father. As he handed over the documents, the court-appointed investigator interrupted. Your Honor, I have an urgent matter to report. Judge Thompson nodded. Proceed. The investigator took a deep breath. We found evidence that the original DNA test was tampered with. Gasps filled the room. Mr. Mark grabbed Sarah's hand, both looking panicked. Order! Judge Thompson demanded. This is a serious allegation. Can you elaborate? The investigator explained, we traced large payments from an offshore account to the lab technician who handled the test. Judge Thompson's face hardened. In light of this, I'm ordering a new DNA test to be conducted under strict supervision. Days later, everyone reconvened. The tension was palpable as the court clerk stood up with the results. The DNA test confirms that Zola is the biological mother of Adam with 99.9% certainty. Zola couldn't contain herself. I knew it. He's my son, she cried out. Mr. Mark stood up, shouting, This is impossible. It must be another mistake. Silence, Judge Thompson commanded. He took a moment before continuing. Based on this evidence, I rule in favor of Zola. She is granted full custody of Adam. He then addressed the billionaires directly. You are ordered to return the prize money of 20 million naira to Adam, to be held in trust by Zola. As the gavel fell, Zola hugged her lawyer, sobbing. Thank you so much. I can't believe it's finally over. Outside, Adam broke away from the billionaires and ran to Zola. Mom, he cried, throwing himself into her arms. Zola held him tight, her voice shaking. Yes, yes, my darling. We're together now, and I promise nothing will ever separate us again. Mr. Mark watched the scene, his face a mix of anger and defeat. This isn't over, he muttered to Sarah. We'll appeal. We'll fight this. But as they watched Adam and Zola leave hand in hand, both knew that their perfect family facade had crumbled for good. Mr. Mark and his wife Sarah were furious after losing the court case. Weeks passed, but the bitterness in their hearts only grew stronger. They couldn't believe they had lost custody of Adam, the boy they had raised as their own. I can't just let them take Adam away from us like this, Mr. Mark muttered, his voice thick with frustration. We were the ones who raised him, and now they're just going to take him away. It's not fair. Sarah's eyes narrowed, and her anger flared even more. If I can't have Adam, then nobody will, she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. I already have a plan. Without another word, she stood up abruptly and marched into her room. Her hands trembled with rage as she grabbed her phone and dialed a number quickly, her mind racing with dark thoughts. Yes, are you and your men ready? She asked, her tone cold and commanding. Everything happens today. When you kidnap the boy, make sure you kill him. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line before she continued, her voice filled with twisted satisfaction. Let's see how they feel when they lose him too. If I can't have Adam, then nobody will. We all lose the boy. She ended the call with a wicked laugh, the sound echoing through the room. If you're excited to see how this story develops, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your feedback will help us shape future videos on this channel. Thank you for watching.